Hello, everyone. This is World Review with Ivo Daalder, a weekly look at news from around the world, produced by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. It's Friday, December 22nd. Here's what's on tap this week. In Gaza, the number of casualties has now exceeded the largest number of Arabs killed in the last 40 years of wars, even as the millions of people in Gaza continue to face what can only be described as a humanitarian disaster. This morning, the United States is expected to support a UN Security Council resolution calling for more aid to be delivered to these people as soon as possible, dropping its previous threat to veto the resolution. How much will this help President Biden as he faces growing criticism at home and abroad for how he is handling the war? And then we'll take a look at the coming year's numbers of elections in Taiwan, in Mexico, in India, in Europe, and of course in the United States, as well as in some 70 other countries. What will voters have in store in 2024? Finally, we're going to say goodbye to 2023 by looking at some of the stories that probably didn't get the attention they deserved. And here to talk about all of these issues are three reporters who cover these stories. Carla Anne Robbins is senior fellow at CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, and previously with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Nahal Toosi is a senior foreign affairs reporter for Politico, and Yasmeen Abutaleb is White House correspondent at the Washington Post. Good morning, all of you. Wonderful to have you join us here in the last show of 2023 before we all head off for hopefully a peaceful holiday for everyone. Carla, let's start with you. Gaza really remains the big story. A lot of drama in New York about trying to get finally a UN resolution through the Security Council without a U.S. veto. And of course, a lot happening on the ground in Gaza and in capitals around the world as people try to figure out how to move beyond this war and find some way to achieve all of the different objectives people have set. So help us set the stage here before we can dive into some of these questions in greater detail.
So you asked whether Biden was going to get any benefit for not vetoing. I think that any benefit he got has been leached away by all the delay that this has gone through. And they've delayed it for 4 days because the U.S. once again has been running interference for Israel. And Biden's just been taking a political beating at home and increasingly among U.S. allies. The Europeans are furious about the Security Council. And, the U.S. is tethered to Israel, and Biden has almost no influence over Bibi. And it's going to probably continue that way. And for Democrats and for Biden, there have been really chilling polling numbers have been rolling out for weeks upon weeks. But one they had to find especially disturbing was this New York Times CNN poll that was published this week that found that some 3/4 of registered voters between 18 and 29 said they disapproved of the way Biden is handling this conflict. And this is really incredible. 49% of these people, 18 to 29, said they would vote for Trump, while 43% said they would choose Biden. This is a major flip. I mean, in July, 47% of them said they would choose Biden. And for these people, when they asked them salience questions, what do they care about? 3% of them said they cared about Gaza, what was going on in the Middle East. And that was comparable to what they said what they're caring about climate. Now, will this hold to the election? Who knows? But they're really taking a beating about this. And they have absolutely no control over what Bibi is doing. The U.S. has been trying to pressure Israel for weeks. Biden even publicly rebuked Bibi, talked about indiscriminate bombing. They sent Jake Sullivan. They sent Austin again. Austin has been talking about how this just doesn't work. Beyond the absolute immorality of what they're doing, he's been talking about how you lose wars this way. And so far, they have really, really very little influence over this. So this is a very tough time for Biden. Getting a Security Council resolution through is not going to do him a lot of good.
Nahal, how do you see it in terms of let's take Carla's point on the lack of influence that Biden, the bear hug strategy, this idea that you would hug Bibi closely so you could whisper in his ear and force him to go in a different direction. That's been their strategy since almost day one. And although the White House says look at what didn't happen, and it's always hard to figure out, what didn't happen. But as Carla said, it doesn't look like a lot of people think that he's having the kind of influence that people would like him to have on Netanyahu and his government. How do you see it?
I think people need to kind of reframe their thinking of what the Biden administration actually wants in this instance. There seems to be a belief that the U.S. is trying to get Israel or wants Israel to stop the war. It doesn't. The Biden administration is fine with continuing the fight against Hamas. They agree with the objective of destroying Hamas. They don't necessarily agree with the exact methods that Israel is using. So they want Israel to maybe change how it goes about prosecuting this war. But I would say probably they've been okay with a lot of the Israeli strategy for a good portion of the fight so far. But now they are starting to see and agree that the disaster is outweighing the benefits. So it is really important, first of all, to remember that the Biden administration supports destroying Hamas. Secondly, do they have influence over Israel? They have some influence, but we overestimate the amount of influence we have over everyone, including Israel. And so they don't think that at the end of the day, they can tell Israel what to do and that Israel will necessarily listen, especially if Netanyahu is in charge. The Israelis are going to do what they feel is in their interest. And so the Biden administration is thinking, well, we will try to do what we can and limit the damage that could happen. And so that's where they make these arguments that, yeah, actually things could be a lot worse. There could be a lot more Palestinians dead. Were we not doing what we were doing? So their point of view is not, oh, we have all this influence and we can stop them. They're like, we actually don't have that much influence, so we're going to do the best we can. And look, one thing I will just add about why they do support the objective of destroying Hamas is that they view Hamas, fairly so, as a major obstacle to a two-state solution. So if you're talking about the longer game of having a two-state solution, then you need to get Hamas out of the way. And I think when they factor all of these things in together, when people are out there saying, oh, they just don't have that much influence, I think that's an incorrect framing. And one last thing, they don't use the leverage beyond rhetoric. That's been one of the criticisms, right? They don't put conditions on weapons transfers. They don't, but that's partly domestic politics. Biden is thinking how that will look politically, domestically, if he does that. And he's very much a political creature. Let's not forget that. But secondly, they don't want to undermine the objective of destroying Hamas. So it's important to kind of reframe the thinking a bit. That's my reporting and my analysis of it.
Yeah, Nahal,
I know you want to get onto Yasmeen, but I think there is a distinction here on strategy and tactics, and which is what Austin. Listen, the U.S. made a total hash of the Middle East for years and years and years, and what Austin's been going there and saying is, dumb bombs don't work. You need smart bombs. Carpet bombing doesn't work. You guys actually have pretty good special forces. Use intelligence, track down Hamas. 20,000 dead is going to lose the war for you. And so it's not, I completely agree with Nahal. They want to destroy Hamas, but by indiscriminately killing Palestinians, what they're saying is they're going to destroy their chances for a two-state solution afterwards. They're going to create many more Hamases, and they're going to blow up the region. That's the message that Austin's been bringing. Sorry, Yasmeen, I jumped in.
No, I think it is, and it just, by the way, shows how complicated it is. Yasmeen, you've been reporting on this from the very beginning, from the White House perspective. So what are you hearing them telling you when it comes to the question of influence? And then pick up also on Nahal's point, which you've just written a story about, which is the real difference is actually not on the creation of Hamas, but what comes after. Between Biden and Netanyahu, and frankly between Biden and Israel writ large.
I mean, I think Nahal hit on a lot of it. The White House does not. They've been very careful from the beginning to say, we ultimately can't tell Israel what to do. They're going to decide what they do. And I think one important distinction is when it comes to U.S. support of Ukraine really can't do much without U.S. support. And so obviously Ukraine is making its own military and battle decisions, but they're highly, highly dependent on the U.S. for aid, military and economic aid, weapons, military strategy. That's not the case with Israel. And the point that the White House has made is Israel is going to do what they want to do, regardless of what we provide them or not. I mean, the U.S. hasn't provided the $14 billion aid package they've promised. That doesn't really seem to be holding Israel back from their military mission. But they would argue that they've had, I think, which Nahal also hit on, and that you hit on, Ivo, what hasn't happened. And one thing that they stress very much is that aid wouldn't have gotten in were it not for them. That seems to be the thing that they are proudest of and they point to most when you ask, what have you gotten in exchange for this bear hug strategy, which is not a term that they use, but is obviously what they're doing. They say, they keep reminding us Israel was adamantly opposed to allowing any aid, any fuel in. Now there's 200 or some trucks getting in. They've opened their crossing with Gaza they're allowing some fuel in that never would have happened. I think the difficult thing with that argument is the conditions in Gaza are so horrific that you can point to that, but there's still mass starvation happening. There's, not only the threat of dying and severe injuries from bombings, but from disease because there hasn't been clean water for more than 2 months now. A lot of children you see these really tragic stories of mothers unable to feed their children, looking around for formula or can't produce milk because they're not nourished enough. I mean, the humanitarian situation, I think, is unlike anything we've seen fairly recently. And so they can make that argument, and they do deserve credit for getting some aid in, but it's not nearly enough. And they say that, but I just think that's not a convincing enough argument compared to the scale of what's happening in Gaza. And on the two-state solution question, the president has provided, pretty unwavering support for Israel from the beginning, despite all the international condemnation. His indiscriminate bombing comment a couple weeks ago was the most critical he's gotten, but even that's not highly critical, although pro-Israel people said they were surprised and, it was... Anyway, I think on the two-state solution question, the president has said the end of all this is going to be a two-state solution. And I've always found that a little bit hard to believe that after there's been mass slaughter on both sides, that there would be any foundation of trust to start beginning peace talks. But that's what he said, and that they're committed to it. They're newly committed to it. But I think we've seen, Netanyahu's rhetoric in the last couple of weeks has become much more forceful in saying, absolutely not. We are not pursuing a two-state solution. He's boasted about the fact that for years now, he has prevented the creation of a Palestinian state. My colleague John Hudson and I reported that Netanyahu asked Biden, as well as Rishi Sunak and Macron, whether they could apply pressure on Egypt's president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, to take in a huge portion of the more than 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. Of course, Egypt said no, they don't want to be part of mass displacement. They don't want to take in a huge number of refugees. But I think that just underscores the massive differences between the U.S. and Israel. Israel has said, and Bibi's floated the idea of an indefinite occupation of Gaza. You have Israeli officials all sort of saying different things about what their military plans are, what their long-term plans are. So I think, it's pretty clear there is no immediate path to a two-state solution. White House officials sort of concede the politics are not ripe for that talk, so they'll sort of put it off into the future. But I think it just shows, they're completely at odds over what comes after the war, what comes next in Gaza, and the logistics of bringing the Palestinian Authority back into Gaza, the Palestinian Authority overseeing a unified Palestinian state, with having these two leaders who have been the obstacles to peace talks in the past. I think it's just, it seems pretty unlikely that there's any real progress in the immediate future.
Yeah, I think you put a lot of somber thoughts on the reality. Let me sort of add two things. I've had conversations this week with a very senior Arab, a very former Israeli prime minister, about the issue. In terms of how much leverage the U.S. has over Israel, there is virtually no disagreement in Israel on what the goal here is in Gaza. And this is across one party to the other. There's a debate about the degree to which hostages need to be taken into account and how to think about hostages. And we had the horrific events of a week ago in which the IDF soldiers killed three hostages mistakenly, but nevertheless did it in a way that you wonder what they're trying to do. So you have that debate, and it's a big debate, but there's no debate on the question of we cannot have an outcome that has Hamas in any way still in control of Gaza. And so when you talk about, well, let's condition aid, let's do all of that, it's not going to have the influence and I think so. Just to bolster what Nahal and Yasmeen and Carla, you all three have said. The second point is I'm glad you brought up, Yasmeen, this question of the goal of trying to get people out of Gaza and into Egypt. When I talked to this very senior Arab official who knows this region as well as anybody, they are absolutely convinced that's the goal. They're convinced in Egypt, and they're petrified about it in Jordan. Because they know that if it happens in Gaza, it's going to happen in the West Bank. And that is certainly the goal of all those right-wing elements of Netanyahu's government. And we rightly focus on the 20,000 dead and the 2+ million people who are going through really horrific humanitarian issues. But, and I think to put together, what the administration has always been concerned about is escalation of this war. And so far, they prevented it. And I think part of their bear hawk strategy is to prevent that as well. But touting the thing that didn't happen as a great success, it's like deterrence of nuclear war. It's really hard to make that a key case. But they would argue they've so far done that. My worry is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to continue to have that from escalating. Carla. Just I want to put those two pieces on the table. But Carla, how do you see sort of the post-war or this transition? Are we getting to a point where the administration maybe not publicly break over the question of what to do in Gaza, but just about everything else?
Well, certainly this issue of the administration and Bibi fiercely disagree on what Gaza is supposed to look like afterwards. And I can't imagine why any Israeli would want to take over Gaza they left in the first place. But as Yasmeen said, that's the reality is so far away anyway. It's just how fierce can that disagreement possibly be? It's more symbolic and has more to do with maintaining relations with other Arab states than it has to do with actually shaping the reality of what comes afterwards. I think that's the first thing. They're obviously very concerned about making sure that this doesn't escalate, which is one of the reasons why Austin was over there saying, you don't want this thing to explode. And I think a lot of their energy is really focused on getting the Israelis to shift strategy, which isn't going to make anybody happy because you've got more than 20,000 dead. But they're trying to get them to not go after Hamas, but go after Hamas in a more targeted way. It's not going to take back what they've already done, but it may be able to, they hope, break Hamas. And then who knows what they inherit afterwards.
Nahal, build on what Carla just said, and also sort of, what does this do for Biden's foreign policy? What does it do for Biden as president as he enters, a week from now, an election year? How does this help?
I think that's a lifetime away, and I actually asked a certain senior Biden aide, you've had a major foreign policy crisis every single year of the presidency. Is it going to be Taiwan this next year? So, who knows? And foreign policy is not something that most voters vote on, and that's for sure. Now, I do think that in places like Michigan, which are a swing state and where there are a lot of Arab American voters, things could make a difference. So I wouldn't put this Israel situation, I wouldn't ignore it in terms of Biden in 2024, but I also wouldn't overplay it at this stage. I do think we're going to see, if I had to predict, informed predictions, but I think the president will have to make some moves in the coming year to kind of try to, I don't know if the word is compartmentalized, but just to kind of do things to project to the American public that he is thinking more long term and has broader interests in mind when it comes to the Middle East. So he'll probably appoint like a special envoy for Middle East peace talks or something like that in the coming year. I mean, that's probably something that he'll have to do. I mean, he'll have to take these steps that are symbolic or whatever just to kind of make the point, at least for the campaign trail. Now, in terms of, a two-state solution and things like that, the administration keeps using this phrase that I think is not very good. It's a political horizon. They keep saying that the Palestinians need to have a political horizon. And it's like, well, a horizon is something you can never actually reach. So why would you ever say that? But I think the point for that is to just put something out there so as to assuage concerns that at the end of the day, that the administration would support something like a transfer of Palestinians to Egypt or other moves that a lot of Arab countries would find unacceptable. Now, what would Arab countries, a lot of them, find acceptable? Destroying Hamas. That's something they don't like to say publicly, but let's not forget that. They're very much on board, many of them, including the Saudis and the Emiratis, with destroying Hamas. So there are a lot of conflicting motives at play here, and these are balls that the administration is going to have to juggle. Let's not forget that who knows how much longer Bibi Netanyahu is going to be in power. I think part of the reason that Biden is bear hugging, or whatever you want to call it, isn't so much about bear hugging Bibi. It's more about bear hugging the Israeli people and telling them, we're there for you, no matter who you put in charge. But hey, Bibi needs to change, right? It's like these signals that he's sending to the Israelis. So when they do hold elections or do what they need to do, they very much bear in mind that whoever they pick needs to have the ear and the friendship of whoever is the president of the United States. And Biden hopes that it will continue to be him even after 2024. So I don't know if that's enough random thoughts for you, but I hope I covered some territory there.
There are a lot. Those are great thoughts. Yasmeen, what do you hear from the Biden people themselves? How focused are they on the political side versus the situation itself and the link between the two?
It's a great question, and I think it's a little bit hard to tell at this point. I think there's still so much uncertainty about how much longer the military campaign is going to last. Obviously, Austin, Blinken, Sullivan, a number of people have gone to the region basically urging them to switch to this, more targeted strategy, which is what the U.S. wanted from the beginning. They never really wanted this campaign of massive airstrikes, just because of the outrage it's caused. It's complicating their relationships with key Arab allies, and now they're saying it publicly now, not just privately, that it's time to move to this more targeted campaign using special forces. I think, like Carla was saying earlier. But I think there are Israeli officials are all saying different things about how long they think that the campaign is going to last. There are IDF spokesmen in Washington who are briefing that it's going to last into the summer. There are people saying it'll be wrapped up in January. I think it's just very unclear how much longer they say this phase of the campaign is going to last. And then after that, I think it's a little bit unrealistic to think the Biden administration is going to seriously pursue an Israeli-Palestinian peace proposal in an election year. Biden's attention is just going to be elsewhere. And I think you need the attention of the president and high-level cabinet officials to make a serious push at that. And Biden just doesn't have the bandwidth to really devote a lot of time to it next year. And not only that, I think they don't see a viable path as long as Netanyahu is in power. They expect that there will be some kind of Israeli election next year. And I think, they will say privately that someone like Benny Gantz or Lapid provides a much clearer path. Biden got Lapid to endorse a two-state solution when he was in Israel last year. They see that as, maybe the ground will be ripe. And one other thing I'll just note is that they are really pinning a lot of hopes on the Israeli-Saudi normalization deal. They think that provides them a path in these talks about a two-state solution, that the Saudis will, basically say there needs to be some progress towards a Palestinian state. But just a note of caution there. I think these would be extremely minor concessions. It's not like there's all of a sudden going to be the establishment of a Palestinian state. But yesterday, the Israeli National Security Advisor wrote in a Saudi-owned Saudi-run newspaper that they were open to the idea of the PA coming back to Gaza with serious reforms. What that means is, I think, a big open question. But it is clear these two countries both very much want that deal, and the administration sees that as a serious bargaining chip whenever they decide to pursue these peace talks. But this is not something they're going to do next year.
Well, I think that the likelihood of getting that deal through and cemented before the end of the war is pretty small. But I know the administration is pressing it. Yasmeen rightly highlighted what the administration would like to see in terms of elections in Israel, which may be a good shift to our next topic, Nahal. If there's any year in which elections are going to be sort of on the front page of the newspaper, it's going to be 2024. And I'm not even talking about our elections on November 5th. I mean, there are so many elections coming up in so many important places. Help us sort of understand what's going on. Let's put it this way. We're not going to list every country in which there's an election. There are over 70. But which ones should we start thinking about?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just going to give you a basic rundown of some of the key ones. But you're right. It's some people are calling it the biggest election year in history. Something like half the world's population is going to have a shot at voting. And we're not just talking about presidential elections. We're talking provincial elections, parliamentary elections. So we're going to be testing democracy, populism, dissent. But it also is expected to be kind of a banner year for disinformation and maybe even artificial intelligence. So there's going to be a lot going on. In Asia, I'd say the big one is Taiwan, especially early in the year. It's happening next month. The front runner is Lai Ching-te. He's kind of seen as more U.S. friendly, whereas China's preferred candidate is Hu Yuwei of the Kuomintang Party. His party supports reunification with China. And there's a couple of other candidates running as well, including Terry Gao, who's the CEO of Foxconn. So that's a big one because it could kind of set the tone for U.S.-Chinese relations for several months during 2024, if not further beyond that, in terms of how that comes out. In Africa, you have at least 18 countries set to vote. They include Mali, Chad, and Burkina Faso, which have had coups over the past 3 years. They've said that they're going to hold elections, presidential ones in 2024. We'll see. Other major elections include Senegalese presidential ones and South African general elections. And then moving to Europe, you've got European Parliament in June. That's a big one because one key question is, first of all, it's just a lot of people voting. But secondly, it's a question of how much the far right will try to grab some of these seats and do what they can to undermine the mechanisms of the EU, which is something a lot of them loathe. You've got Belarus voting as well for legislative elections. The one key question is whether we're going to see protests. The way that Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, faced last time, he basically took the election. And I know this one's going to be a real nail biter, but Russia is holding an election. My God, I have no idea how that one's going to turn out. But again, that actually could also be a moment where we'll get to see the strength of the Russian opposition inside Russia. And given that kind of the best known Russian opposition figure, Alexei Navalny, who has been in prison, has gone missing, it's going to be a challenging one. I believe that election's in March. So that'll be important to watch, not for the result, but for, I guess, the process. Iran is also holding parliamentary elections in the coming year. Again, a question of whether protests will come up there. The regime does not look like it's going to lose any sort of power, the hardliners. Pakistan and India are both holding national elections. Those will be massive. And I think, it's just going to be a question of how Modi does and whether his reforms, he's pretty popular despite his crackdown on Muslims. But in terms of success for the BJP, he's done really well. For Pakistan, it'll be interesting to see the military's role and whether they really allow a real election to go forward and who becomes prime minister. It's a tough one. The UK may hold an election. It doesn't have to till 2025, but Rishi Sunak and his Conservatives are not doing that well in the polls, so they might actually go ahead and just hold an election. And that's a really important one in terms of US allies and friends. But I have to say, every time there's like a new British leader, my editors are like, oh, can you write a piece about the relationship between Biden and this new British prime minister? And it's like, guys, it's fine. They're going to get along fine. The Brits, like, no matter what, they are going to be close to us. Their whole system is designed to be close to us, whether you're conservative or labor leader, whatever. Like, it's not going to have too much impact on the relationship that everyone considers so special. Mexico also is holding a major presidential election. That's going to impact all sorts of things from trade to migration. AMLO, the current president, he has his preferred candidates, and we'll see how much he tries to pull the strings. But that's definitely one to watch as well. And then, of course, there's the U.S. election. I'm not going to go too much into that, but I will just say that one of the questions that I was asking myself as I was going through these lists and trying to get a sense of everything that's going on, which was even so much bigger than I thought it was, is there a way that elections in one country can affect the results of an election being held later in a different country? It's one of those questions that I'd love to see how it works out. Would things be different if the United States was voting earlier in the year as opposed to in November? I don't know if there's a way to really know for sure, but we do know that like far right parties, populist parties, they do seem to kind of feed off of one another now and then. And if there's a way to measure the impact of one election on another down the line, I'd be interested to know those results.
It's very interesting. I agree. And there must be some political scientist who's doing some research somewhere on that question. But unfortunately, I don't know who that would be. But if others do, write Nahal and she will figure it out at politico.com. Carla, great list, by the way, Nahal. And really, I've forgotten some of those already. So great list. When you listen to that, sort of two questions to think about. One, which one are you going to be watching closely as we get through the year? And secondly, what's the common? You think there's going to be a common theme in these elections, or is it just too geographically diverse and the local circumstances are too different? How do you see that? What are you going to look for across these elections, if anything?
Well, first of all, I have to get something out of my head before I move this on, which is Nahal has to show her editors the British, Billy Bob Thornton, Hugh Grant scene from Love Actually, which best captures the special relationship. And it's a Christmas movie. So, in fact, can we talk a little bit more about Love Actually?
I will send them that clip next time, definitely.
It's just the best capturing of the special relationship I've ever seen. Okay, let's go back to the things that matter. I'm very interested in what's going to happen in South Africa. Which is the ANC may lose for the first time, probably premature, but that's quite interesting. I think Nahal has raised a really important question here. What I'm going to be watching is how much is xenophobia, anti-migrant politics driving it in so many countries here. We know there are a huge number of people on the move all over the world because of disruptions of war and because of climate change. And we know that there are very, very, very bad feelings in lots of countries for that. And that seems to, a lot of politicians are whipping that up. So that's the first thing that I'm going to be watching for. And we do also know that across borders, that the Russians are pushing this, but we also know that there are right-wing, politicians, including in the United States, who are collaborating with different political parties around the world who are whipping up these things. So I'm going to be looking for disinformation. I'm going to be looking for anti-immigrant sentiment. I'm going to be looking for how much populist forces are on the rise. And it doesn't even have to be right-wing populism. If you look like what happened in places like Slovakia, I'm looking at how much, certainly in Europe, the European and the North Atlantic is strained by this. You got to worry about Orban, but you also have to worry about Slovakia, which is trying to undermine aid to Ukraine. So there's lots of things on the line here, as well as what's going on inside of these countries.
Well, and rightly, as you said, in Europe, you had the Dutch election with one of the largest votes for a single party in a long time, coming from the far right, and of course, I think Nahal rightly mentioned the European Union election, in which the far right, particularly in Germany, is going to try to push a major point. And I think it's all immigration. Immigration is and people moving is really key. Yasmeen, what are you going to look at? I mean, as a White House correspondent, I mean, looking at the U.S. election, but when you look at these elections coming out, what do you think people should be paying attention to?
I mean, I think Carla hit on it, looking at the rise of populist forces, because I think, especially like Nahal was saying earlier, that a lot of these elections are taking place well before the U.S. election. I think people will sort of look at them to read the tea leaves about what might happen here. I do remember during the 2016 election that Brexit happened just a few months before, and that I think sort of woke a lot of people up to the possibility that Trump could really win, that there was, a huge sort of populist force, right-wing forces that were taking over countries that you might not expect it in. And then I think, from the White House point of view, they're going to be watching this very closely to see, Biden has talked a lot about the need to strengthen alliances, build up alliances. Obviously, that's going to depend very much on whether he remains in power or not, because Trump, I think, is even more right-wing than he was even, 4 years ago, 8 years ago when he was running. But I think it's, the White House is going to be watching it closely to see what the sort of new global order will look like, what they're going to be contending with, and how worried Biden needs to be about those forces here. I think on the immigration piece, which Carla had brought up at the end of her comments, that's a huge issue in the U.S. elections too, and it's a domestic issue everywhere. Trump has been using pretty alarming rhetoric to talk about immigration here, poisoning the blood, calling his enemies vermin. The White House has leaned pretty hard into the sort of comparisons between Trump's rhetoric and Hitler's rhetoric from Nazi-era Germany. But you've seen Biden embracing more hardline immigration positions, I think because of this very real fear of some of these more hardline positions, trying to sort of move to the center a bit more. And obviously he's angering progressives with that, but they've clearly made a calculation that immigration is going to be such a huge issue in 2024 that it's more advantageous for Biden to embrace, more hardline positions that I think are anathema to a lot of the Democratic Party.
A lot of things to watch here in the coming election. How I want to just one for you that the first one coming up that I'm looking at closely is the Taiwanese election, and we've seen recent reporting, I think by NBC, and CNN, that she was that in the meeting between President Xi and Biden, she once again really pushed very hard for the unification of Taiwan, and one of the worries that I know people in the White House have is clearly if Lai wins, as it looks like he will, and the DPP continues for now another term, that would be 12 in a row, that at some point the Chinese may feel that they need to do more than they're already doing in terms of squeezing the Taiwanese. That's something we should be worried about?
Well, first of all, the Taiwanese election is apparently being held, by the way, like on the eve that the World Economic Forum starts. So that's, how that goes could actually impact a lot of conversations in Davos. So that just could kind of be a fascinating element to watch as well. In terms of the relations there, I mean, what she reportedly told Biden was the same thing that he said in public, and his people have said in public 1,000 times. He said, it's going to happen. We're going to reunify with Taiwan, but we want to do it peacefully, and we haven't set a time frame. So he was partly responding to these reports that, he's decided on 2027 or whatever. And so given the other moves that the Chinese have made recently, including restoring some military-to-military communications, having some meetings, I mean, I don't get the sense that they're necessarily inclined to pull the rug on what is a somewhat stabilizing relationship. I say that very carefully, just because whoever wins might continue the same policies. I mean, it doesn't sound like Lai winning is necessarily going to rock the boat. It's not like he's going to call for independence or something like that. So I kind of would predict more just kind of the sameness. I think, things might change in a second Biden term or a second Trump term or whoever wins. At a certain point, a few years from now, she might decide the time is right. But then I don't necessarily think we're going to see like a traditional military campaign immediately. It could be very much cyber. It could be economic. It could be putting any number of pressures on Taiwan, which is really not even nearly as prepared as even a place like Ukraine to deal with an invasion. And that's something that it's a little hard to tell. One thing I will note is, Biden has repeatedly said that he will send U.S. troops to protect Taiwan. And this actually is not the whole strategic ambiguity policy. He's said that like at least 4 times. And it's been fascinating to watch that. But my theory on that is that basically he's saying it because he's effectively telling Xi, don't do it on my watch. Don't do it while I'm president. I will fight you. Now, he's not speaking for future presidents. And so maybe Xi might feel like he can wait Biden out when it comes to Taiwan.
Well, I mean, that's for sure. He could wait Biden out because he's president for a long time, and Biden needs to be reelected, and he only gets 4 years if he gets elected. So yeah, I think that may be a smart move on his side. Let's switch over. Last question, Carla, starting with you. I mean, this has been a really busy year. Ukraine war, so many other things that we've been talking about. But what's one of the issues? What's one of the stories that happened this year, good or bad, by the way, that should have gotten more attention? Not just at World Review, but generally speaking, when you open up the newspapers or turn on the TV channels or your radio, what isn't getting reported as much as it deserves?
Well, actually, I've got 2, and one has been covered hugely, but not satisfactorily in my mind, and that is AI. And because a lot of this just got caught up in the Sam Altman story, is he running OpenAI? Is he not running OpenAI? I mean, I think we don't really understand the dangers here, and we don't really understand this whole question about regulation. It's not the question of. It's not a question of privacy. People seem to have been sort of conflating this. This is controlling Facebook, not controlling Facebook. This is just a massive issue. And it's really complicated and hard. And I think I know a reasonable amount about technology, and I don't understand it. And I really would like to see better coverage of it. And that's, for me, been very frustrating. On terms of a really important humanitarian story, the civil war in Sudan, 6 million people displaced. Half the country needs humanitarian relief. Totally eclipsed by the war in Ukraine, which I consider fantastically important, and totally eclipsed by the war in Gaza, which is right now the #1 humanitarian crisis in the world. But that doesn't take away from the incredible suffering that's going on in Sudan.
Well, so on the IRC, the International Rescue Committee has just done its 2024 watch list, and #1 is Sudan. #2 is Gaza. #3, South Sudan. Just from their perspective, from a humanitarian. So yeah, absolutely, and underreported. Yasmeen, when you look back at all the stories that you wanted to have written but didn't get enough time to do, what jumps out at you?
Well, for me, just as a White House reporter, obviously Ukraine was not undercovered for most of the year, but I think it was in the last part of the year because of the Israel-Gaza war. And so for me, one story I would like to do that I just have not had time to do is what happened that so much support dropped off so quickly for Ukraine. Did the White House get distracted by the war in Israel, that it didn't work hard enough to secure the funding for Ukraine? But I think it's just stunning that it looks like Congress is not going to pass any more money for Ukraine. We're at the end of, the White House said that they were going to run out of money by the end of the year. We're at the end of the year. There's no sign. I mean, the House is gone. There's no sign that there is going to be a deal. The border deal, in exchange for the supplemental looks nowhere close to being done. I don't think it's going to happen. And so I will try to tackle it in 2024, but I would love to know how it had fell off so quickly and what it means going forward. I mean, this was the absolute worst case scenario that the White House couldn't even imagine a couple months ago, that just no funding would get passed.
Yeah, even 3 or 4 weeks ago, they thought it was a done deal in one form or other. Nahal, what story didn't you get to write? What did your editor say wasn't important? Turned out it was really important.
No, actually, I did write this story, and my editors, to their credit, did run it, and I just wish more people would cover it, which is basically the failure and near death of the human rights movement. They are not succeeding. Name a single major human rights victory in recent times. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm forgetting something, but honestly, overall, dictators seem to be on the march. There's this shame factor doesn't work anymore. Statements denouncing actions, investigations showing terrible things happening. It's getting nowhere. The Security Council is blocked because of Russia and China. The United States is hypocritical at best when it comes to enforcing these things. Even within the human rights movement, there's divisions over how to deal with Gaza and Israel, because Israel is, even within the human rights movement, a very sensitive issue. So I just think the kind of ineffectiveness of the human rights movement these days, compared to decades ago when they first were launched, and back when, holding protests and calling people out actually seemed to make more of a difference. I think it's just something that is worth further examination and questions among human rights activists about what they really should be focusing on going forward, what can have an effect. So that's my offering.
Well, I like all of them. Unfortunately, we should have spent more time on all of them too. That would have been, my favorite one that I've been wanting to do is this amazing threat that the Venezuelan government is making to an part of Guyana next door, just at a time when Guyana is becoming one of the great new sources of oil. Surprise, surprise. And somehow it is not getting the attention that similar threats we're getting in different times. And maybe South America just isn't the same as Europe or the Middle East. In fact, it isn't when it comes to the way people are reporting on it, unfortunately. But many stories that we will have for 2024. I want to thank Carla Robbins of the Council on Foreign Relations, Yasmeen Abutaleb of the Washington Post, and Nahal Toosi of Politico for a really terrific conversation at the end of the year. We didn't get any cheerier, despite the fact that everybody is now going to run to their VCRs and put in the tape of Love Actually, or stream it if you are modern, and in order to find out what the special relationship to the United States and the UK is. Number one recommendation from Carla Robbins. I hope everyone has a really wonderful holiday, and let's hope that next year, 2024, will be one of health, of happiness, and above all, of peace and security for everyone. Thank you all. We'll be back in 2024.
Thanks, Ivo.